I need to tweak the microphone still a bit, so in case it wouldn't work, just weave or something. So now let's find out whether it's possible to speak at a Web Analytics Association conference event without trying to mention the word Web Analytics even. Let's see how it goes. The topic indeed is data and context, and for us modern folks, it should be quite easy to determine and to tell data from context, or wouldn't it? What you see here is a part of an ancient map. It's actually not that old, just a bit more than 400 years. And a map, as we know, is depicting a territory. A territory, you can see, you can determine here land masses. You can determine the sea. You can see a river, I guess. You have a couple of islands, a city is there. And from bottom to top, you have the meridians. And you have as well a circular shape on the very top of the picture, which depicts a longitudinal circle. Now, it as well carries an inscript, Pygme hic habitant, and this means pygmies live here. And so this is quite unusual for a map, at least when we think about the maps that we have around. Well, maps, particularly this map that we are looking at, is indeed, the first and foremost purpose for it is indeed to make people comfortable with finding their ways, and particularly their ways on the ocean. Indeed, with a very old word, this thing that this particular map enables is indeed to navigate. And navigate comes from the Latin word navigare, which is composed from the Latin word for ship and the Latin word for do. So basically it's not do a ship or make a ship or ship something, but it's indeed to travel by sea. That is the very idea and the very purpose of this map from the 16th century. Now, this hasn't been exactly the shape that maps used to have all the time. Here I have an older one for you, which comes, it's said to be the first printed map ever from the year 1475, and it indeed as well depicts a territory. It depicts basically a landscape, and what you see here, it is called a so-called OT map. What you see is the circle of the world with the 3 known continents back at the time. At the top of the image you see Asia. In the lower left corner you see Europe, and in the lower right corner you see Africa. Now the T that is as well indicated here is indeed what divides the continents from each other. And so the part that goes from the bottom to the middle is indeed the Mediterranean Sea. Yes, indeed, this is the sea that is dividing Europe from Africa, isn't it? That other thing, the upper part of the T, well, the left side of it is indeed the River Don. It divides Europe from Asia. And the right part of the T is indeed the River Nile, which is dividing Asia, or which is separating Asia from Africa. As you may or may not know, in the very center of this map is Jerusalem. Without any offense to anybody, it is, at least for those who have drawn these maps, it is indeed known to be the center of Christianity. And so therefore it's only just that it appears right in the center of it all, or doesn't it? Well, these OT maps indeed, they serve a totally different purpose. And indeed, it is more to depict the beauty of the divine creation than anything else. So it's just a perfect circle, which is, in the symbolism, which is a sign for the divine. And then, of course, having this perfectly symmetrical shape of the world is just the purpose of this whole map is nothing else but to show the user, to show the viewer, hey, everything is in perfect order. This is just such a beautiful creation. Well, as said, these maps have been in use since the 10th century approximately. And so, well, if you would want to travel by sea, well, how useful would it actually be? So therefore, let's jump back to the 16th century, shall we? That is basically the map that I showed you in the first slide, but now it shows a bit of a bigger area. And, well, those of you who have seen a map before may find some familiar patterns there. We can see something that pretty much resembles Britain. And I would say that is part, I don't know, could be Scandinavia or something. And indeed, this is pretty much what it depicts. It is, according to what we know, it is the first map of the North Atlantic Ocean. Now, the real beauty behind things like that is, of course, that from today's perspective, this looks a bit odd, nevertheless, somehow beautiful. So it has a certain purpose, and if we now take into consideration that the purpose for such a map is to enable travel by sea, then the whole thing becomes really interesting. It was indeed the genius of two Flemish guys who came up with depiction of maps like this. And basically, you could refer to them as the Steve Jobs and the Steve Wozniak of the time. And indeed, these two had just a brilliant business idea. They said, okay, look, we are in Flanders, and we have all these rich Dutch and Netherlands merchants around us who are traveling, and they are trying to get spices from everywhere. And so how about we would sell them like a service, hardware as a service, if you wish. We could get them maps which were no longer supposed to be hung down on walls 3 times 3 meters in size, but in fact which would be small enough that you could take them with you, you could put them in a book-sized form and could just fold it and take it with you. So that was the idea. Well, it was indeed these two guys. One was Abraham Ortelius. Ortelius was an engraver, so he was indeed trained in map making and trained in really kind of depicting nice and smart and smooth things in rather small places or rather small areas. The other was Gerhard Mercator, a mathematician, an intellectual, and an innovator. Now, the beauty of this whole thing was that Mercator came up with an idea that really revolutionized map making. So far, and this goes as well for the first map book, a map book, I mean the thing that you could carry with you, so far the only forms of maps that were in use for travel were indeed road maps. I mean, for sure, makes sense. And the form of that pretty much resembles what you can get today from Google Maps Get Directions. So here's a start point, here's an end point, and it would list you literally all the different stages and steps of your journey. That was pretty much what such an itinerary was all about. And that is all perfect and nice, and it worked obviously pretty well for traveling on the continent. Or on the sea? I'm not quite sure. Well then, Mercator came up with an idea, said, okay, what if the measurements on a map would no longer be measured on distances, on travel time, or any such thing? What if we could only set fixed angles as the only measurement which counts? What would we gain from it? Well, actually, if you look at it, I'm not quite sure whether this is really easy to see, but basically here you see lines which are following this curved shape. So the idea would be, if you now were to travel from the Orkney Islands, which are pretty much here in the north of Britain, if you now want to travel to the island of Friesland up here, then basically all you had to do was indeed to start on the Orkney Islands, set course west 90 degrees, and thank you, and off you go. You were traveling along the meridian, or you were traveling along the latitudinal length, and you wouldn't have to do anything else. You wouldn't have to calculate your distances, you just follow the lines on the map. Now the compass was already there, so therefore people could then indeed figure out whether they were actually having the right heading. And the sextant was of course already there as well, so in case they would have got lost along their way, they could easily determine then their position. And by yet again checking the compass and the position, they could again determine an angle, and this would give them their deviation from their target path. That was indeed the beauty of the whole thing, and it was, of course, as most things, it was so utterly simple and easy, and people just understood it perfectly, so they started copying it all over. And according to my knowledge, until today, I think all maps for navigation purposes are indeed following this particular way of setting fixed angles. Now, one thing further, if you would now twist the map display in a way that these latitude things are no longer curved shapes, but if you can have them straight, then basically, of course, the position, the relative position of the things on the map would change a bit, sure. But nevertheless, you would then have a map which would allow you to determine the precise angle between any 2 points on the map. Wow, how cool is that? And compare that to the itinerary or compare that to the stuff that you occasionally get when you try to get your directions with Google Maps today. Just as a reminiscence to the first slide that I showed you, indeed, pygmy hic habitant, pygmies live here, we had on the first thing, and indeed, up there, north of Scandinavia, pygmies live here. And so what we see here is a very strange thing indeed. We see pretty much the most accurate, the most data accurate depiction of the world known by the end of the 16th century. And we as well can't help but noticing, okay, sailing ships, some sort of mythical creatures in here, dragons are here, yes, and up there, and well, pygmy hic habitant. So, in fact, what are we looking here? What are we looking at here? We are looking at data, yes, but are we supposed to take the pygmy hic habitant literally? Has anybody been there? Is this an accurate description of the world we live in? Is this data or is this something else? Well, the Wozniak and Jobs couple, or Ortelius and Mercator, they of course knew that all of these things were only valid if they would be able to add value to their customers' businesses. I mean, they are not stupid after all. You can't come up with something like this and then turn out to be totally stupid. And as this still was the age of discoveries, indeed the maps were improving from year to year. And that allowed them then to generate a business model which pretty close is to what we have with all these software updates that you occasionally pay for. Just, oh, Photoshop newest version, 250 euros or something like that. So yeah, that generated a constant revenue stream for them. And of course it paid all the expenses, so they were indeed able to buy and sell maps as they saw fit. And so they could assemble a bigger and bigger and bigger pile of maps, and they could always make sure that what they had there was always the latest, the newest, and the hottest, of course. Now, having said that, it is of course so that not every year, for every edition, every card is redrawn. Indeed, they invented yet another thing, which is what I refer to as data copy-pasting. Indeed, it is so that vast parts of this map that you see here, that Ortelius has drawn in 1570-something, is indeed derived from yet another map, and it is this one. This one is indeed one of Mercator's maps, and I've cut it a bit. Normally, it really would continue all the way up. And indeed, what this was supposed to be is the first true map of the North Pole. The North Pole, you can see it pretty much up there. It's basically, of course, I mean, you've seen it before, haven't you? So basically, the North Pole is a black cliff, all consisting of magnetic stone. And of course, it is surrounded by a whirlpool. This whirlpool is surrounded by a continent which is divided by 4 large rivers. And then, in the southeastern part of this continent, on this one here, indeed you see the very same inscript as on Ortelius' map. Pygmies live here. Now, the idea that the North Pole looks like this, I mean, come on. It doesn't look like this, or does it? No, it doesn't. So where came the idea from? Well, the idea is said to be derived from a 14th century book